With the Dynamic Shapes feature in Astute Graphics Vector Scribe, you can create and modify shapes like squares, rectangles, ellipses, polygons, and stars using a powerful and intuitive set of features. You can easily convert one type of shape to another, or you can change a shape by adding or removing path segments, corner effects, slices, and more. So let's see how it works. Once you install Vector Scribe, you'll have some new tools in your toolbar, including the Dynamic Shapes tool right here. You'll also have a Dynamic Shapes panel that you can open by choosing Window, Vector Scribe, Dynamic Shapes panel. At the top of the panel, you can see these 7 buttons that correspond to the different kinds of dynamic shapes. And if I want to create one, I can click a button and then click and drag in my document. Note that dynamic shapes are drawn from the center, and you can rotate them as you draw them. Or you can just double click in the document. If you use the double click method, the initial size of the shape is set by the fields in the panel. So for example, with a rectangle, the width and height, or with a circle, the diameter, and so on. Dynamic shapes come with control points that you can click and drag to resize the object. And note that you don't have to hold down any keys on your keyboard to keep the proportions of the shape as you drag. If you hold Option or Alt and drag one of these points, you can add dynamic corners to the shape. To remove dynamic corners, just drag one of the radius controls all the way back out to the corner, or double click it. Dynamic shapes also have this center point that's visible when you have the Dynamic Shapes tool. You can use the center point to tell which shapes in your document are dynamic even when they're not selected, like this one over here. You can also use it to select and move dynamic shapes. If you want to select multiple dynamic shapes at once, you can hold Shift and click on their center points. But you can't just drag to draw a selection marquee, since dragging would create a new dynamic shape. I'll just undo that. What you have to do instead is hold the Shift key before you start dragging. You can see the cursor change with the little plus sign, and now I can drag a marquee over and select both of these dynamic shapes. There's also a handle on dynamic shapes, and it appears at your cursor as you're drawing a shape. It shows you the angle that you're drawing at. Notice how the angle value changes in the panel as I move my cursor. If I drag straight up, that's 0 degrees, or I can hold down Shift to constrain it to 45 degrees, 90 degrees, and so on. And at any time, I can go back to the panel and change the angle. I'll change this back to 0. If I drag the handle, I can create a slice in the dynamic shape. My first drag sets the start angle right here, which is now 45 degrees. And if I drag the other handle, that sets the angle at the end of the slice shape, shown as 315 degrees right here. The slice is retained if I convert to a different shape using the panel buttons. So I can convert this square to a circle, and I still have the slice. I can adjust the handles either by changing the values in the panel or by dragging the handles. And I can drag both handles at the same time by holding Option or Alt as I drag. I can also go to the panel menu and choose Reverse Slices to invert the shape. And I can use the panel menu to define slices as percentages of the whole shape instead of degrees, which would come in very handy if you were making pie charts. To remove a slice altogether, just double-click on either handle. Another thing to note about dynamic shapes is that you can easily control how many path segments a shape is composed of, both as you're drawing it and in the panel. For example, if I draw a dynamic circle, by default it's made up of 4 segments, as defined by these 4 points. But if I want a different number of points to work with, I can change that in the panel by increasing or decreasing the segments value right here. If I want to change the number of segments as I'm drawing, I can press my up-down arrow keys or the left and right brackets. And if I switch from a circle to an ellipse to a polygon, the number of segments stays the same. After the shape is created, I can still use the left and right bracket keys to change the number of points and segments. If at any time you want to change a dynamic shape into a standard Illustrator shape, you can do so by selecting it and going to the Dynamic Shapes panel menu and choosing Remove Dynamic Status. Likewise, you can select simple Illustrator shapes like rectangles, ellipses, and polygons and make them dynamic by choosing Convert to Dynamic Shape. And here's one more thing to note. The Dynamic Shapes tool will remember the attributes of the last shape that you worked with and use these attributes when you draw a new shape. This can be a great time saver, so if I draw a new square, And I use the handles to cut out a slice, and I Option or Alt drag a corner to create some rounded corners. The next dynamic shape I draw will have the same slice and corners, even if I choose a different shape type, like a polygon. And you can see my new polygon has the same rounded corners and slice cut out of it. If I don't want to do that and instead I just want to start with a basic shape, all I have to do is type the letter B while I'm dragging to get a basic shape. And if I need to convert an existing dynamic shape back to a basic shape, I just select it, go to the panel menu, and choose Basic Shape. In this movie, we saw how you can use the Dynamic Shapes feature in VectorScribe to create and modify different types of shapes in your Illustrator documents. With Dynamic Shapes, it's easy to convert one type of shape to another, or change the number of path segments, add corner effects, or slices. And you can convert simple Illustrator shapes to dynamic shapes, and vice versa.